It's a good question. My journey started early in my teenage years, and I was like, I was a pretty overweight kid and not into movement or exercise or nutrition or any of that. And at some point, it just kind of like clicked in that I wanted to make a change, that I wasn't totally happy with, my body and the way I perceive myself and everything. And the first step was really getting interested in playing basketball, which I was at an advantage being like a very tall kid in wanting to, play basketball and get better. And so I played a ton in the year going into high school. I like nonstop played basketball all summer and lost like 30 or 40 pounds. And that's where nutrition started to really interest me. I found a couple of sort of quote unquote mentors in the nutrition world that I read all their material, and I just saw their passion for like wellness and nutrition was really exciting to me. And I just got more and more interested in the nutrition side of it while continuing to, play basketball and improve in that aspect, but also start to lift weights. And that's kind of how the evolution shifted from more so playing basketball into the weightlifting and the physical training that I started to find an even deeper appreciation for. And nutrition played a big part in that. So when I went off to university, I one of the things that I really wanted to focus on was finding a school that actually did nutrition as a major, because that was something that I had started to, I had studied it for 3 or 4 years just out of pure curiosity and passion throughout high school. And then I wanted to take it to that next level and actually study it deeper. And at the same time, that's when I also started to develop more of an appreciation for studying psychology and like the human mind and those wellness psychologies that a lot of schools don't really focus on a whole lot. There's a lot of the clinical and sort of abnormal psychology is the main interest, but having professors that were really interested in wellness psychology and things like mindfulness and meditation is kind of the starting point to a lot of this. So I first came about the concept of floating when I was studying psychology in university. And because I did a lot of courses on mindfulness and meditation and those positive psychology aspects that really the things that improve well-being in people, it was sort of talked about as a concept there that wasn't really as well known as an industry or anything. That was, about 10 years ago. And it took another 5 years or so before it really became an, something that was talked about more widespread as an industry, where my interest started to pick up in wanting to try it for myself. Because that's also when I really got deeply into my own meditative practice. And being several years into practicing meditation daily, I was looking for sort of, I guess, something that next level of deep meditation. And it was really intriguing to me that these sensory deprivation tanks started to become a thing that could actually help you get into that deeper meditative state and really facilitates that. So that's where my interest started to pick up in this whole idea of the float tanks. And from there, it took a few more years of meditation and everything, because there was nowhere nearby where I could actually go and do this. And to think that, you have to travel several hours just to find a float tank is not realistic for everybody to just pack up for a day and drive somewhere else and go float. So it really wasn't until last year when I started to think about kind of the business development that I was looking at in my own personal life and where I wanted to go. And there's tons of, with the wellness background that I have, I wanted something that would really be able to help people and not be the same as what everybody else is doing. And there's lots of gyms, and of course, with a passion for fitness and weightlifting, like a gym is kind of the first thing that came to mind for me. But it was really, I didn't want to do yet another gym if I was going to kind of go all into a new business idea. And so that's when I started to do more research and actually get out and do the sort of look around for float centers and do the experience for myself. So it was about a year ago when I started to actually go out and explore these other float centers several hours away and just kind of get more experience and really know if this was something that I was interested in developing further as a business goes, as well as like my own personal practice with floating and expanding sort of my meditative practice there. So that's when I went out and checked a couple other float centers out and started to build this idea for myself. And it clicked in right away that this was something totally different than just meditation. I've compared it to basically like a 10x meditation effect. So that's after several years of practicing consistently and meditating, where to be able to get that deeply relaxed after the first float session, I knew it was something really special that was really interesting that I wanted to be able to promote. Because one thing that I've really deeply believed in is that meditation is the closest thing to a superpower that we have as humans. And I wanted to find a way to encourage people to meditate, and not even just the meditation aspect, but practicing mindfulness on a daily basis is really important to be able to get into the present moment and not just be stuck in the past or focused on the future, but being present and appreciative of the everyday is really important to us all. And so that's where this really came together into one thing, especially after experiencing floating and taking my uncle along for the journey with me. And as somebody that can't relax and can't settle down, he was in the float tank for an hour and he thought that it was only 20 minutes. And that's because you get this complete loss of time and that anxiety to be always stuck on the minute, because he was able to just fully embrace, and there's nothing to anchor you to because it's a sensory deprivation environment. So that was kind of the eye-opening experience, that there was something really special here that could get anybody to tap into a more mindfulness or meditative state, rather than somebody that's taken years of practice to get to that point with meditation. And so that's why I like to sort of refer to floating as like a gently forced meditation, because you're able to actually get into the state, and then it sort of becomes that aha moment where you know that there's something valuable that needs to be developed further, because meditation really is that important to us all. So my journey to becoming a business owner has really been like a long and arduous process, I would say. I don't think I naturally started out as somebody who ever envisioned being a business owner. It was more that it definitely started out with sort of a perceived idea that I was a natural leader, and that actually kind of developed more from the sports environment. And throughout university, I played ultimate frisbee and eventually became the captain of the team, and really thrived and enjoyed being in that leadership role. And that was the first inkling of it. And then after school and being in different business settings or different work environments, kind of starting to experience sort of the divide between management that was good at what they did and management that, whether they were just assumed into that role or they somehow climbed the ranks but didn't really have that sort of leadership practice and principles in place that people more or less respect and like to follow. There's a difference between somebody that can lead by force and lead by example and really develop a respect with the people that they're working with on their team and being a team leader. And so that's sort of where it started, with perceiving a difference between strictly leadership and management. And that's where my frustration with different like management that I had worked under just kind of became this thing that I couldn't ignore anymore, and I wanted to go out and do something on my own, more or less. And it also just came from a constant need to like grow in my own life. And I guess studying psychology and everything, I've got sort of that idea and background behind growth and mindset and how those two things play together in really developing more fulfillment out of life. And so that's where, as I constantly evolved and started to create my own things, I wrote several books about training and fitness and how to like develop a stronger mindset, and just kind of started on the side with sort of, I guess you'd call them entrepreneurial endeavors, like coaching nutrition online, and then evolving into a little bit more fitness based writing and things like that. And so that's where the whole business ownership thing started, and it went from there to the point where after continuing to study sort of the whole principles of business and leadership and everything like that, I was just able to take the leap into actually doing my own thing. So I definitely would say that I had management roles in the past in other jobs, but if I wasn't actually doing something that was scratching my own itch, even though it was great to be like the leader of a team and develop the respect and sort of lead by example, as I said, I really wanted something that was in my area of passion, because I think that's really important to be successful and really enjoy what you're doing long term. I don't think anybody can have an exact roadmap to what it's going to look like when they're building a business and getting things up rolling from scratch, but I'd say overall, I mean, that's kind of why I got into this route of, I guess if you want to call it entrepreneurship or being a business owner, is because I like those big challenges. And even though there's always going to be setbacks and monumental things that you have to overcome, it's kind of where my life's led up to this point where I was able to handle it no matter what came my way. And obviously doing something like building a float center, where at the end of the day it's all about stress relief and being able to relax, is certainly like a reinforcing and reassuring thing, is that no matter how hard it gets, eventually it's going to be something where I can like relax a little bit more and enjoy like the fruits of my labor.
Right. Okay. Another question is, okay, so who is floating for?
So that's a really good question, and I think it's constantly evolving even within the first month that we've been open as to who floating is for. Now, I sort of, as I've talked about before, like my belief is that meditation is a superpower that we need to tap into, all as each individual and every human really has this in them and should be taking advantage of it. So I personally believe that there's not really one or even a few demographics or subsets of people who can benefit from floating, but it's just constantly evolving to show that we all need some sort of mindfulness in our life. And as a roadmap or a starting point for somebody wanting to practice their daily meditations or just continue to learn about that, floating's a great starting point, and that's why I think this is such an exciting and valuable business to be, getting up and running, is because it's that great place for anybody that has no clue where to start with meditation or even know why they should be meditating, is that by floating you suddenly get it. And it might take 2 or 3 sessions, but if just looking from my own experience compared to the 3 years that it took me to get into a good meditative practice and state, it's obviously that's a huge difference in the time and effort. And not that there's anything wrong with that long challenge that it takes to become a good meditator. I think we all need to be able to face that sort of adversity and challenge in order to really develop an appreciation. But it definitely is nice to have sort of that cheat sheet or that shortcut into at least getting started on that road. Yeah, so I really got into heavy weightlifting when I was in university, I studied psychology and nutrition, and throughout that process, one of the things that I used for my stress control and stress management was going to the gym a lot. And over time, it just evolved into a real passion of mine to be able to lift heavier weights and kind of get towards competing in what's called strongman. And that just developed into a passion of mine. And so they kind of go hand in hand, because I was really fascinated with like the human psychology, and being able to push yourself to another level is sort of like a deep mindset skill that has to develop. Otherwise, you can only go so far with just like the physical limitations of the body. Like, you need to be able to unlock a little bit more of the mind in order to get to that next level. And so that's where my journey sort of started into wellness and human performance and nutrition and psychology and all of that. If you are an athlete, I personally, that's why part of this whole business adventure was getting floating into sort of the purview of athletes and their practices, is because I know firsthand how valuable mindfulness and the visualization of sport is for performance. And there's nothing better than being in like that sensory deprivation environment in order to visualize your performance to the maximal level. So, for example, there's a lot of professional athletes that are incorporating floating into their recovery practice. If you're an athlete who's needs that recovery, floating is really great, because you're in that 1,000 pounds of Epsom salt, and the magnesium helps you to recover and is really important for muscle function. So that's why we see a lot more professional athletes incorporating it. But it's also that visualization and mindfulness aspect. And so people like Steph Curry are using it after every basketball game, because he goes in and visualizes his shot and is able to really deeply tap into the motor visual practice that scientists have shown is really valuable. Because if you keep beating your body up without using sort of that trick with the mental performance aspect, you can't perform as well as if you give yourself that break, but you're still practicing mentally behind the scenes. And so that's one of the biggest values for athletes to float with. We've seen a lot of people, in the sort of older demographics coming in for a couple of reasons, because floating can really help cut down anxiety and stress a lot. So anybody that's working in a very stressful professional job, they really need to give themselves that break and give themselves permission to take that time out, whether it's on a monthly basis or a little bit more frequently. It's really important to de-stress. So the just that complete relaxation you get in the float tank is unrivaled. There's nothing else that compares to it. So we see a lot of people that are going in there and giving themselves the permission to unplug for an hour and just let their minds and bodies totally relax. And so that also works really well and goes hand in hand with the physical benefits of floating. So anybody that's dealing with stress on their body, so physical pain, chronic pain, different joint or muscle issues, are finding a lot of relief, because that 1,000 pounds of Epsom salt in the float tank allows them to be completely buoyant and decompress their body in a way that's not typical. Even if you're lying on a bed or anything, you've got less stress on your body in the float tank. So it's amazing to see people coming out feeling completely refreshed physically. And so that's the nice thing about our float tanks as well, is you don't have to go for that sort of fully and deeply sensory deprivation aspect if you don't want. I didn't even know or fully appreciate how powerful floating could be in this aspect until we were actually up and running and started to see some of our customers coming in. But if you've got any traumatic brain injury or concussion that you're dealing with, floating can be very powerful because of a couple reasons. But the meditation aspect is really important, because we know that helps to build gray matter in the brain, but also just a lot of physicians and a lot of healthcare practitioners are suggesting for concussion recovery that you get into a sensory deprivation aspect, and this environment of the float tank is unrivaled in that ability to disconnect from all external stimuli so that your brain can completely heal, or at least start the healing process, without being bombarded by everything that we're normally inputted with from physical sensations, auditory, visual. All those things get completely turned off in the full sensory deprivation of the float tank that we're able to provide here. So we don't like to pigeonhole one sort of expectation. Everybody's journey into their first few floats is fairly unique and individual based. So I don't like to say that there's one type of expectation. What we do find though is anybody that's able to or does a little bit of research into whether it's breathing or has some experience with yoga or meditation, they tend to accelerate their journey a little bit more because they already know how to breathe deeply and relax a little bit deeper than perhaps somebody that's like overwhelmed with stress and just super busy and always go go go. But that's kind of the cool thing with floating as well, is even those people who are always on the clock find that within those first few sessions they are able to totally tune out and they lose track of time, and that's just ends up being a very relieving effect for a lot of people, to lose track of time and not know exactly how long you're somewhere or you're in the present moment. So that's why a lot of people refer to it as the time travel effect that you get from floating. And it really is true that once you kind of get deeply relaxed into there, you can no longer count on any sort of stimuli around you because there is none, but also like your heartbeat slows down so much and your breath rate slows down so much that, for example, me kind of counting on the 60 beat per minute typical heart rate, it just becomes inaccurate to try to keep track of time based on your heart rate. And eventually that just becomes very relieving. Before you come for your float, all you need is to bring yourself. So we provide everything that you need here at Flow Spa. Some people are more comfortable wearing a bathing suit their first few times, but you're in your own private room, you've got the lock control, and you've got your own private shower, so you don't actually need to bring a bathing suit. And a lot of people that are going for that full sensory deprivation aspect don't want a bathing suit on because they don't want the distraction of the clothing. So that's totally up to you, but feel free to just come in and bring yourself, and we provide everything else you're going to need for an awesome experience. So we have all the bath towels and the bathrobes and hand towels and all of the different amenities that you need in order to just get the most out of your float. Somebody that's in their first few floats, we highly recommend that you're not under the influence of anything, because you want to experience this based solely off of your body's processes. I know that it definitely is something that a lot of people kind of tie into the whole psychedelic aspect, but that's not what really floating is intended for, especially in our application. We're here more for the mental relief and the mindfulness, which really needs to be tied into being fully present. And if you're on the influence of anything, that can negatively impact your experience of your own body. But the other things that you do want to avoid in your first float are, you don't want to have caffeine within the few hours beforehand, because your heart rate's going to be a little bit jacked up and you're going to just be a little more anxious and jittery, and it's harder to relax into that if you've got like a lot of caffeine in your system. You definitely want to have a snack or like a light meal in the few hours to 90 minutes beforehand, so that you don't have any hunger pangs or distractions with your stomach grumbling in there or anything like that. And other than that, there's a few other things that we do recommend. It's a good idea to avoid shaving the day of or the day before, just so that you don't have any like fresh skin that's going to be stinging or distracting in the salt water. That sensation does go away really quickly, but to some people, it just takes that much longer to relax into it if they've got that distraction first. You also need to be aware that you can't come in with any fresh tattoos or fresh hair dye, because we You don't want your tattoos to be like stinging or anything like that. And with hair dye, we can't have any contamination of the water, so make sure that your hair runs clear in the shower. Typically, we recommend up to 10 days prior is when you want to avoid any hair dye before going in for your float. So all of our float sessions are at least an hour long. We do have customers that are coming in for longer time frames. If you're unsure if you want to actually be in the float tank for a full hour, I would suggest talking to us first. The reason that we don't offer 30-minute sessions, which I've gotten that question a couple of times now, is because you don't get the same experience out of it, and the whole point is really getting that deep relaxation experience. So with a half-hour float, a lot of other float centers, and this is kind of coming off of research with other business owners in the float industry, because like I said, being only open for a month, we haven't had a whole lot of requests for these shorter time frames, but you get the neat experience of being completely, weightless, sort of deprived of the sort of gravity or because of the buoyancy in the float tank, but you don't get that deep relaxation within half an hour of your first float. Perhaps after many sessions and getting more experienced with meditation, you can kind of snap into it a lot quicker, and then it becomes a little more valuable to have like a shorter float in lieu of a nap or meditation in the afternoon. But most people are here for like that deeper stage of relaxation and losing track of time, which doesn't really come with only 30 minutes in the float tank. So that's the main reason, is it's just not as valuable or as great an experience as we know it can be if you go in for a full hour. So we do have some people that kind of get out, halfway through their float session, which is totally fine. They can get out. Some people, have a hard time turning their brain off for that full hour, especially in the first few sessions. So that's fine if they think that they've been in there for an eternity. That sometimes is common, but it's kind of the neat time travel effect where sometimes it feels like an eternity, but then all of a sudden it snaps into being over. You can get out, the lights in the room will snap back on because they're on motion sensors, and you can kind of stretch out, do whatever you want to. Most people totally get back in and continue the rest of their float and get the most enjoyment out of it, even if they do hop out for whatever reason, whether they're feeling a little anxious or restless or something like that. But yeah, that's totally up to you, and you've got that full hour to kind of use at your liberty. Well, is you don't have to go for that sort of fully and deeply sensory deprivation aspect if you don't want. You can leave the lights on, you can leave the music playing, and you're still going to get those physical benefits, even though the sort of disconnect mentally might be turned down a little bit, but it's still a great escape in that way.